and welcome to the VMware Cloud Foundation Live, a monthly live stream where we discuss strategies and solutions for your cloud infrastructure journey. I'm your host, Pete Fletcher, and on this month's episode, we're going to focus on accelerating business outcomes with VMware Cloud Foundation. Now, joining me for this conversation is Director of Product Marketing for VMware Cloud Foundation, my good friend, Mr. Rick Walsworth. Rick, how you doing, sir?
Hey, Pete, doing great. How are you?
Doing all right, man. Doing all right. I've been looking forward to this.
Me too.
You and I, we've been talking for a while, and obviously lots of changes at VMware. So many good things to talk about. And I've seen you make this a very similar presentation to the one
Yep.
that we're going to discuss today. And I thought, man, this would be the perfect platform since we're now starting to do this monthly live stream. Man, let's just throw it on. First guest.
Might as well, right? Without a net, no net. So let's go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do it live.
Let's just do it live. Absolutely. Yeah. So Rick, I want to talk about, obviously, we'll go through things like, the customer pain points, and how VMware Cloud Foundation addresses those pain points. I'd love to, if we could, just get a look at the architecture and what customers can expect. And then maybe go over a few use cases. We're definitely going to save time for some Q&A.
Definitely.
We've actually got our good friend Heath Johnson, who's going to help us with some of the Q&A as well. But before we do any of that, I need to talk to you. Fun fact for those listening, if you don't know, Rick is a bit of a, let's just say, salsa king. and not on the dance floor either. We're talking about,
No, definitely not on the dance floor.
Yeah, we're talking about real salsa, like making it. And I learned this when you and I, when I saw you in Palo Alto, and you actually brought some into the office, and it was delicious. And I'm a bit of a salsa snob myself. I can't make it, but I do know the difference between good and not so good salsa. So with that, I want to ask you a couple of questions before we get into the ECF stuff. And that is sort of like, how did you actually even get started in the salsa game?
Well, I mean, the truth is that I just couldn't eat a lot of the store-bought salsas. I mean, even some of the specialty salsas, they just didn't have the right mix of heat and flavor. And I've been a huge fan of heat, right? So one of the things that I started doing is I started growing my own peppers. And I started with habaneros, and then I started moving to the more exotics, right? You get to the ghost peppers and the Carolina Reapers and the scorpions, and then found that you start mixing those in and you can still keep the flavor. So you're getting kind of that good heat on the front end, but then kind of followed by a little bit of flavor. And what I started doing is I actually started mixing in, things like mangoes, right? So I've got one of my favorite go-tos is the ghost pepper mango salsa that I make. And what it does is you get a little bit of sweetness on the front end of it, but then you get the heat on the back end. And, myself, I like it, hot. People usually ask me, how hot do you like it? And it's like almost as hot as I can stand. I've actually made salsas that are too hot. You almost can't, they're almost unedible. Or if you start eating it, you can't stop, because as soon as you stop eating it, it starts essentially, attacking your tongue as part of it. But to me, I found a real good balance between that heat on the front end and then a little bit of the sweetness to be able to balance it out, to be able to give it that way. I mean, people tell me I should, start bottling it and selling it and do it as a business, but then it becomes work, right? I've really just kind of done it for fun, to, want to just be able to keep it as something I could share with friends and family as we do that. But I appreciate you asking about that, Pete, because it's been a passion of mine for some time. There you go.
I've actually seen a few of the pictures from Jardín de Ricardo, and I must say I'm impressed. As I said, as a self-proclaimed salsa snob, I always, to me, it has to be the perfect mix of not too diluted, not too chunky, and just the right amount of spice. So very cool.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah, so let's transition. And again, post your questions for Rick, whether it's salsa or VMware Cloud Foundation. We'd love to hear from you. So Rick, why don't we get started? Let's talk a little bit about pain points. Like, what exactly are, in general, like what is the status quo, and what are customers feeling, and how does VMware Cloud Foundation answer those?
Certainly as we've gone through this, right? And when you start talking with customers that are in the middle or just planning these big transformation projects, the focus usually goes around technology, right? And technology is obviously an enabler to be able to pull all this together. And at the end of the day, what they're trying to do is they're trying to figure out how to be able to grow the enterprise, how to be able to drive more innovation and leverage your infrastructure really as a tool to be able to help drive that innovation. But the part that people tend to overlook is really around people and processes, right? If I just focus on the technology itself, but I overlook the people and the processes, the technology isn't going to be able to help me. And so as part of this, a lot of folks have really looked at, all right, do I try to drive net new consumption leveraging my existing infrastructure, right? So they'll try to bring in 3-tier, legacy infrastructure into these big transformation projects. And the problem is that they bring in a lot of tech debt with it. And it does typically slow a lot of these programs down. And so what happens, right? People basically use public cloud as the easy button, right? They go in, they say, look, I'm just going to go ahead and, sweep the floor. I'm going to migrate applications. I'm going to refactor these applications. And then, 8 months later, they're ready to go. But even for those customers, and as, if I kind of build this out here a little bit, even for those customers that have made that transition, the dilemma is, do I refresh my existing platforms or I just go all in on cloud? The challenge with cloud is really that cost management. And we've heard this from a number of CIOs we've talked to in terms of a lot of them just can't control that cost, right? The cost gets out of hand very, very quickly. Matter of fact, there was an IDC study last year that showed essentially 64% of CIOs said that they are overspending on their already high cloud budgets. So the ability to be able to manage that, is very difficult. And when you factor on top of that when you look at things like reserved instances and the ability to be able to essentially have some dedicated performance guarantees within it, a lot of times you end up wasting resources, right? So, again, same study showed that 30 to 35% of that cloud spend is going towards wasted cycles that I'm actually not using as part of it. Yeah. And so, obviously for certain use cases, public cloud makes a lot of sense. But the refactoring of applications and really the ability or the inability to be able to manage that cloud cost does start to become a real pain point as I go through it. But then if you look at the alternative, right, if I just try to take my legacy 3-tier infrastructure and try to bring it into this transformation framework, I find a couple things. First off, that it's very difficult to be able to do that and also to be able to address some of the things we talked about before, right? How do I bring in my people and my processes as part of this transformation? And, if you look at it, there's a study actually last year that showed 60 to 80% of my IT spend typically goes to just keeping the light on, right? Yeah. Just keeping that legacy infrastructure up to date, patched, and make sure that all my security vulnerabilities are taken care of. But when I'm operating in a siloed environment, I have to do this across compute, storage, networking, and to be able to make sure that my security team is in line with that. So it becomes very, very difficult to be able to keep all of those systems in line. And what we know, right, and this number keeps going up, the average cost of a data breach is now over $4 million. And that's average, right? So you're going to have customers that are going to be a lot higher on that scale and customers that are a lot lower on the scale. And so when looking at this, you really need to look at the architectures that make sense as you're trying to deploy these net new deployments and trying to get in as part of these larger digital transformation programs.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about cost. Obviously, the cost of security breaches is astronomical, but just in general, like the cost of cloud in general, the smaller you are, sure, the larger you get, the cost of cloud can certainly become astronomical. It's like, sometimes, it's kind of like my trips to Europe. I say, oh, well, there's airfare is this much and hotel is this. I'm only going to spend X dollars. And then by the time I get home, I'm like, wow, I'm way over budget.
Right. Exactly.
It's definitely a common issue for sure.
Exactly. And so as we look at this, right, is that, okay, so what are my options, right? What can I do as I go forward with this? And at the end of the day, architecture matters, right? And so if you look at these traditional siloed architectures, right, where I've got my compute, my server team, I've got my storage team, I've got my networking team, these siloed architectures really do bring forward a lot of essentially poor efficiencies in terms of how I leverage that. So as a result, I'm not getting full utilization of this. And the fact that I'm running on proprietary hardware really gives me a lot of difficulty in terms of how I can grow and scale these. as well as provide the flexibility and agility, right? If I want to be able to drive a DevOps program and leverage it on this, existing infrastructure, I have to use APIs, right? And a lot of times I have to customize these APIs or write custom scripts as a way to be able to provide automation and orchestration in these environments. And so if you look at the flip side of that, right? If I take a page from the hyperscaler playbook, right, where I essentially use really much more of a platform architecture, where I have a well-defined infrastructure layer that's bringing together compute, networking, storage, and security in that infrastructure layer. Now I've taken that first step. And you think about it as like, okay, how did AWS and Azure and GCP, how did they build their infrastructure? Did they go off and buy storage arrays and traditional networking gear? Hell no. What they did is they actually started with standard off-the-shelf hardware, right? So they took commodity x86 hardware and used that hardware as a way to be able to build out, scale out infrastructure. And it's really putting the value in software. So if you look at all of the services, all the capabilities that are available in these hyperscaler cloud networks, it's really the ability to be able to leverage that software-defined infrastructure as a way to go forward. And so if you look at how bringing these kind of technology processes, bringing these on-prem, it does provide now the ability to essentially break down some of the silos that exist and allowing now these teams to work together in much more of a platform architecture mode. And Gartner data backs this up, right? In their Predicts 2024 research that they put out this year, they said more than 50% of companies that are still using traditional architectures, as I show on the left, are moving towards this platform architecture approach. Now it's going to be a combination of doing this on-prem and building out, software-defined data center type infrastructure, as well as using cloud-based infrastructure. But as we said in the beginning, you got to make sure that you're bringing your people and your processes in as part of this. Otherwise, what you're going to do is you're going to start to bring in a lot of technical debt. And with that technical debt starts to bring a lot of complexity. And complexity, as we know, is the enemy of execution. If I'm trying to execute one of these big, bold programs, I need the ability to be able to remove a lot of the obstacles that are typically going to get in the way to be able to do that. And so at the infrastructure layer, that's the first place that they typically attack this, where I'm essentially taking the same approach. x86 hardware, software-defined infrastructure, and putting all the value across storage, network, compute, and security. I'm putting that all in software. But then you have to be able to figure out, okay, now how do I orchestrate this so this works in unison, works as one single system? And so that orchestration layer, and again, very much following the same lines as how the hyperscalers have built it out, is really the ability to be able to build out this leveraged infrastructure in a way that now I can automate a lot of these capabilities, automate it in the way that now I can essentially start to become hands-off, right? The admins don't have to go in and essentially turn the knobs as a way to do this. They're essentially just turning this infrastructure up. Now, once I do that, I can start to deploy infrastructure at scale to be able to service these types of opportunities. Again, same model. If I bring my DevOps team now, my DevOps team now has the ability to go through this kind of IaaS layer, right? Where I'm taking all of these abstracted components of infrastructure and now bringing it up into much more of a services construct, right? Now I'm actually operating as a services construct where now if I'm a developer, I go in, I use my APIs, I use my declarative syntax and YAML code as a way to build infrastructure as code. Once you have that in place, now you're really following that model that allows you to be able to deploy these services at scale and allow your developers to be so much more productive in terms of how we do this.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a story, this has been a very, it's like a recurring story at VMware
Yep.
over the years. It's like, taking away the complexity, abstracting the complexity, like application owners don't really care what types of hard drives we're using, what are their speeds and feeds. They need a place to put their app. They need a certain amount of storage, and so the idea of, abstracting that complexity. But I love that it's evolved to a place where we're talking about compute, networking, storage, and management, and just literally raising it up. So it's like, developers can provision storage, in their own language. Administrators can provision environments for their customers, their internal customers. It just makes perfect sense. It's a story that you could almost have predicted the future if you would have been watching VMware over the years. Like, it just makes sense that this was going to be where we've come to.
Right. Exactly. And again, as you start to, scale this out and start to do this not only within the data center, but now you start to look at, okay, how can I extend these services out into my edge? How can I extend these services out into my partner clouds and my hyperscale clouds? The ability to have that consistent infrastructure layer on-prem across all these cloud endpoints now gives me the power to be able to say, look, services I build on-prem or I build within data center one, I can now take those same services because of the fact that I've got that consistent infrastructure layer and a consistent operating model. I can now start to deploy this at scale on-prem, at the edge, or out in the cloud services.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't know how he pronounces this. I'm going to totally butcher it, but I just added a comment on there. Yeah. Adekunle says, I love the fact that you're able to address each section of development looking at the architecture and developer. Absolutely.
Well, it's important, right? Because you have to be able to, obviously the primary audience is the infrastructure team, but the infrastructure team, you have to understand who are their customers, right? And so to the point that was just made, you have to make sure that the developers, you have to make sure the platform teams are all bought into this, because of the fact that that's how, again, you start to bring the people and processes into it. Once you start to do that, you can do that at scale. Now it gives you the ability to have a very repeatable model. And again, this is a page right out of the hyperscaler playbook. We didn't invent this. We're really now taking this and actually applying this into on-prem data centers that have the ability to be able to extend that cloud operating model out to the edge or into cloud.
I like it.
Cool. And so what does this mean, right? In terms of what VMware offers, and certainly, with a lot of the changes that have been well publicized, once we've closed the Broadcom acquisition, what does this mean now in terms of the ability to be able to scale this out? And what are our offers and how the offers map to this, right? So if you look at that same platform model that I just talked about, it is the ability to be able to build out my compute, storage, and networking layer. I've got that infrastructure layer, but this is now all fully integrated. And then underneath of a common automation and operations framework. And now what that framework does is it gives you the ability to be able to take essentially the abstracted resources from an infrastructure side and now start to deliver those as services up to that IaaS consumption surface. This consumption surface, this is where the developers live, right? They go in, they log in, they get their own namespace. But within the namespace, now they actually have a set of resources that they can now start to use and deploy into their specific sprints. So now they can actually start to self-serve in these environments. So to build their own environments, they can run through their sprint. When they're done with the sprint, they destroy the cluster. Those resources now go back in the pool so somebody else can use it. So it really is this model of kind of this flexible, fungible model that allows me the ability to leverage a defined set of infrastructure resources, but now I can apply it out to a number of different workloads. And this is highly extensible, right? I can use this for traditional client server, Oracle, SQL, NoSQL based type applications that are running my back office. So I can run this in my traditional back office mission critical apps I'm running today. I can extend this now into containers because of the fact we've embedded a Kubernetes runtime within the environment. I now actually have a full runtime that I can actually use as a way to orchestrate containers within this broad-based environment. But, obviously the big thing, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, the big thing is the ability now to start to push into some of the higher performance, low latency workloads, such as AI and machine learning certainly been part of the portfolio for some time, but those have always been more predictive AI models. What we're doing now is now starting to push into these generative AI models, where now you have the ability to essentially have these machines start to think and start to learn from what's building out there and be much more responsive as part of it. Obviously, much larger data sets, but the common platform approach where I can build a platform, have that platform essentially be customized to be able to fit within these environments, now extends that out from, your kind of common back office applications, modern applications using containers and Kubernetes as an orchestration framework, and then now applying those constructs into AI and Gen AI. This is really going to open up, and obviously, with GTC coming up in a couple of weeks, you're going to start to see a lot more announcements and rollouts of net new products that are supporting these capabilities.
Yeah, and I see private AI up there just
Yep.
above the blue box on the right there. I see some other add-ons. So these are the new add-ons for VMware Cloud Foundation that I've heard about.
Exactly. So it's the ability to be able to essentially take the core platform, which we kind of show as VCF in the middle there, that kind of the big blue box in the middle. Take the core platform, but now how can I extend it into a number of different use cases, right? So I talk about security and load balancing as one of the use cases. Now I can start to bring in, through the application network security team, I can now start to bring in advanced services that allow me the ability to use AI as a way to be able to determine anomalies within the system, whitelist or blacklist any resources or workloads that may be affected by that, so that I can quarantine those workloads, take corrective action, and then if indeed it is an issue, I've isolated that issue there. So security starts to become, it's obviously a conversation that's top of mind for a lot of our customers, but it starts to become a competitive differentiator as you look at deploying this out across there. On the other side, the ability to be able to have these Tanzu services. Now I can take that Tanzu service that's embedded within the platform, but now I want to be able to bring a orchestration and observability capability. And those are some of the management tools that are available through that advanced Tanzu service that are offered there. And I know you have this in one of your upcoming sessions, Pete, but ransomware disaster recovery, this is so, so important. We're hearing this come from small companies all the way up to your largest enterprises. Everyone's concerned about not only how do I prevent a ransomware from coming in, a malware coming into my system and creating a ransomware event, but if indeed that happens, in the unlikely event it happens, how do I recover from it, right? How do I make sure that my systems are protected and I can recover those quickly? And then, last but not least, and this will be a focus, certainly as GTC comes out in the next couple of weeks, the ability to be able to run these private AI services, where now, rather than putting my intellectual property up in the public domain, running it out in cloud services, I can now start to run these in a secure environment where, my CIO knows that the only people that are going to have access to this information are the people that I trust, the people that I give that capability. And there's an entire ecosystem, and it's actually a much deeper conversation. But this is something we announced last year at VMware Explorer, initially with NVIDIA, but then expanded it into relationships that we have with Intel and IBM. And essentially what we're doing, Pete, is we're building out a complete ecosystem using VCF as that core platform to be able to deploy these services at scale, both for customers that are essentially providing their own service provider. So essentially they're becoming their own cloud provider on-prem, but then also working through our provider managed services. These are our CSPs, those that are deploying sovereign cloud for secure environments. And then obviously the relationships we have with our hyperscalers, providing the ability to take this common infrastructure model and deploying this out across different cloud endpoints at scale.
Yeah, you definitely mentioned the private AI part. That obviously was the big buzz at VMware Explorer. I mean, after Chris Wolf got on stage and started, unveiling it, I cannot tell you how many conversations I had personally with
Yep.
customers, partners about this. It just makes perfect sense because no one's going to get out there on Chat GPT and put their intellectual property out there. So having a system like that is obviously mandatory, but having VMware Cloud Foundation to be the base of that just makes perfect sense. And on
Yeah,
the,
absolutely.
I'll touch one thing, and we're going to dive deeper on this next month on the live stream with disaster recovery. But I've actually heard heard people say that it's sometimes, like you said, in the unlikely decision, in the unlikely instance that you might get attacked, they're becoming a little bit more common, some of these ransomware attacks, and that's not the time you want to find out how long it's going to take to be
Right.
restored. I mean, and I think that's one of the really cool things about some of the live recovery, the features that VMware offers in this area, is having that ability to quarantine and look for the information and get your data up, where you're, near instantaneously, you're actually up and running again, as opposed to just being like, oh, we have to pay first.
Right. And I mean, what's unique there, Pete, is really the ability to have that isolated recovery environment, right? I mean, that isolated recovery environment, it's a game changer in terms of how you can essentially use that to not only do all of the forensics that's needed to be able to understand what happened and why, and how can I prevent this in the future, but it's also an environment where I can actually make this now run out in my own environment, so that if I had to use that as a way to be able to recover applications, get my production systems back up and operational, I now have an isolated recovery environment to do exactly that. But again, we don't want to steal any thunder from Yumi and team
Absolutely.
coming up in a couple of weeks. But again, this is just something that's so important to us, and we're building it in as an extension of our core platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned, this is a great way to transition into some of the other discussion around the use cases that are available for VMware Cloud Foundation.
Yeah, cool. I'm seeing a lot of great comments and chats coming in here. Jay asked a question: does SDDC Manager replace the vCenter server? So absolutely not. No, SDDC Manager, it has its functions, but as does vCenter Server, right? And there, what you're seeing within the VCF architecture is really the ability to leverage SDDC Manager as that automation and orchestration engine. Working the ability to be able to, let's say, as I'm doing my day zero stand up of net new infrastructure, SDDC Manager automates a lot of that. So I essentially build the configurations based on what I need to do, and then essentially hit the button, and it allows you now the ability to deploy the day zero services. Day one, from the standpoint of configuration, it's a combination of SDDC Manager working with ARIA automation as a way to now build those configurations and deploy that at scale. But the most important point, and this is really where we have a lot of conversations with customers, because many times this gets overlooked, is a day two lifecycle management, right? That what happens when I need to upgrade across the entire environment, or what happens if I need to patch a component of the stack within it, right? So the ability to automate a lot of those capabilities, especially in these large scale, multi-site, multi-geography type deployments, it becomes very complex. So the ability to have essentially not only the pre-checks that allow you the ability to go in and essentially make sure that everything's operational, but also the ability to automate this in a standardized fashion, does a couple things. First off, it's going to streamline. It takes what may be in some cases a multi-day operation. I can now do this in a matter of hours or less, depending on how complex my environment is, because it's automated. So that's kind of the first benefit, is that I'm doing this now in a much more compressed time. My maintenance windows, I can start to close those maintenance windows down as a way to do this. The other area is the ability to provide predictability, right? That once I hit that go and I'm ready to start applying those changes, I have predictability and a nice audit trail to be able to show. And this is important when you start to go into regulated environments where they are essentially mandating that you not only apply the patches, but that you've got an audit trail in terms of what was updated when and by who. So it does provide that level of detail as part of it. And then the third area, which a lot of times gets overlooked, is that, a lot of times it's the coordination of updating, vSphere and vSAN, and updating NSX, and bringing in all the dependencies. We now have the ability to be able to collapse that under a single framework, apply all the pre-checks to ensure that the systems are ready to apply those changes. And then once I'm ready to go, it actually goes through in a much faster basis. So it gives you the ability to accelerate what is typically a big pain point in terms of deploying these, allows you to be the ability to be able to accelerate these at scale. So great question. Keep them coming.
Yeah.
Looking at some of the comments as well as we go through this.
All right. So I know you touched. I think the next slide we talked a little bit about already was just sort of some of the, enhancing the VMware Cloud Foundation journey with add-ons. Do we want to
Yeah,
expand
certainly.
on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's kind of double click on that. So as we talked about from a high level, I just wanted to provide a little more of a double click on these add-ons. Some of these are coming soon, right? So for example, Private AI Foundation, although it was announced last year at Explore, it's been in development. We actually have a design program that's right now working in a number of customer environments. We're fine tuning the models, but the whole intent here is to have a turnkey solution for these Gen AI workloads. So this is, the initial deployment of this is going to be based on the work we've done with NVIDIA. And what this does is builds upon a lot of the integration that's existed in the products for some time, right? You go back to 2022 and the VCF 4.4 release, when we actually released integration with the NVIDIA AI Enterprise Suite. So that's their full complete suite. And what it does is it takes advantage of the ability to be able to virtualize GPUs, much like we virtualize CPUs and compute infrastructure for years, right? So it takes that same approach. And I can use things like vMotion and DRS as a way to be able to not only establish the initial placement of it, but I can also use it to be able to load balance all those capabilities. But then it goes all the way up the stack to be able to working with all of the tools that NVIDIA provides as part of this turnkey solution. So certainly looking forward to GTC coming up in a couple of weeks because of the fact that it's really our ability to be able to, and our opportunity, I think, to showcase some of these solutions that have been built out, leveraging VCF as a core platform, and then obviously the integration work on top of that. The second category is really more around these application platform services, right? This kind of goes back into the Tanzu portfolio. And what it does is it actually provides the management, the orchestration, all of the rest of the tools that developer teams need as a way to be able to integrate these large kind of platform as a service and container as a service type deployments out across there. And what we've seen through this, customers have actually achieved a lot better improvement in their developer productivity because of the fact that essentially for them, infrastructure becomes invisible. I don't need to worry about how many compute resources I need, how many storage. Essentially, those quotas are built into the namespace and gives them the ability to be able to deploy these at scale. And then going to the next category around security and load balancing, right? So what this does now is this starts to bring security in as a core construct of all of these services that are being delivered out across there. So again, the whole idea is to be able to automate delivery of these security services, both from the standpoint of the ability to do kind of deep inspection of the packets that are out there, the ability to use AI as a way to establish a set of whitelist, and then understand where the threats are coming from and the ability to be able to balance those threats out. And we've seen already where customers have actually deployed this and provided about a 66% savings in their security operations costs, just because of the fact we're taking a lot of the complexity that typically is present with these systems, taking that out. And then finally, and again, just to kind of set up for your upcoming in this upcoming series, ransomware disaster recovery is really a comprehensive platform that gives me the ability to deploy this out across there. And again, independent tests that we've done have shown about a 75% faster downtime reduction using this as part of it. So think about in terms of what that would mean for your business, right? If I can tell you that you can go in and regardless of the type of event, you can actually recover these systems 75% faster, that's kind of a compelling proposition, right? Something that's like, all right, why not? So great services there. And then again, I think we'll close here with a little bit just to talk about some of the use cases, right? So how can I start to apply this now as I'm looking at the projects that I have today, and then what are the things that we're doing, and kind of what's changed, right? If you think about, I've probably seen some of these use cases deployed before, but what's changed is that from the standpoint of, as we look at these from kind of a marketing definition, right, in terms of what are the big categories: infrastructure modernization, cloud experience for developers, and build infrastructure that's secure and resilient. How do I now apply these out at scale? And then what it does is it also maps into everything all the way down to the professional services. So as I look at the technical content and best practices that are built out around, each of these categories, and then the three kind of sub use cases under each of these categories, what you will find is you will start to find now that we will see best practices, white papers, technical, architectures and reference architectures out behind these, as well as validated solutions. So you'll start to see blueprints and validated solutions that take these and start to put these into practice. So we've got real good alignment now in terms of how we deploy these at scale, and all the way down into the professional services. So what it does is it gives me now the ability to be able to extend these services as I start looking at private cloud deployments and how do I want to do these. There's essentially a complete playbook in terms of how I can deploy this at scale, and watch the ability to be able to now apply best practices, reference architectures, all the way down into professional services offerings. And these are aligned up and down the entire organization. So again, I know we didn't talk about it a whole lot, but one of the big changes that has happened since the close of the Broadcom acquisition is laser focus. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Because of the fact that we now have essentially two core offers and a set of add-ons that go into it. It's now allowed us to be able to have laser focus on a set of deliverables, and allowed us now to be able to take all of the resources of the company and put it directly behind this. And I think these use cases are a good example of how to do this, and then how this is going to benefit customers as they deploy at scale in their own environments.
Well, what's funny about that is the slide. Go back 2 slides.
Yep.
While we were going over the slides and we had the different. There we go. I was looking at this and I was thinking, there was a time not too long ago when each one of these was essentially, and this is a little inside baseball, but were separate business units internally inside of VMware, and it's just interesting to see how now the laser focus on VMware Cloud Foundation, everybody is still under one area focusing on, and it's just the end result of this is that it's, like you said, laser focus, and everybody focused on one single thing, and that's just making VMware Cloud Foundation as tightly integrated with all the products in VMware and as lean and mean as possible. So to me, when I heard Hawk say that early on, I was like, this is fantastic. I love this approach. But okay.
And not only that, but I think the other area you're going to see it, and obviously I can't talk about roadmap in this forum, but one of the other things you will see is you're going to see an acceleration of some of the kind of items that have been on our roadmap maybe for quite a while. I mean, I've been here 5 years. I was hired as kind of the VCF product lead. And there are a couple features that I kept seeing slip out to the right from a roadmap standpoint. All of a sudden now, with this focus and really bringing all these resources together, you're now going to start to see acceleration of some of these innovations from a roadmap delivery standpoint. You're going to start to see those rolled out as we start to kind of execute against our plan. So like I said, I know there was a lot of challenges going through this, especially looking at some of the commercial changes that were made. But from an organizational standpoint, this restructuring has really put laser focus behind what we're doing as an organization. And another good example of that, if I kind of go back, to this whole question about license portability, really license portability is the ability to be able to say, look, I want to be able to take my investments that I made with VCF on premises today, and I now want to extend that out into my different environments, right? So if I look at how do I make these subscriptions portable between what I'm doing on-prem and extending it out across there, this now gives me portability and it gives me investment protection, right? We've announced already a couple weeks ago, we announced with Google Cloud. So that's the first of our partners that we're rolling out, but we intend this to be available across our CSP partners and across our hyperscalers, where I can now take instances and cores that I essentially purchase on-prem with VMware Cloud Foundation. I can now start to extend these out across there. So, brings that portability of the subscription to be able to help provide better investment protection. And it does allow the ability to be able to have essentially these supported cloud endpoints available out across there, which, by the way, is available for the core VCF platform, but also for the add-ons. so that if I bought, VCF and then I brought some add-ons into it, I can also take those add-ons and bring those add-on services into these cloud environments as well. And obviously the use cases start to open up, right? I start looking at where are the use cases I can start to apply this, around hybrid cloud. Obviously we've touched on kind of ransomware, disaster recovery. That's a key requirement there. But now I start thinking about, okay, if I want the ability to start to spin up cloud resources for burst capacity, right? Now I have the ability to be able to extend some of these services out there, leverage the investment I've made in my existing licenses, and now apply these out into some of these hyperscale environments. So again, everything we're talking about here is, this is information that's in the public domain, but this is really what's behind the strategy of trying to drive VMware Cloud Foundation as the core platform, and then growing that platform out through services, and then certainly through partners as we look to grow this.
Yeah, I love it. I love it, Rick. Well said. That's really good. I want to get over, I know we're going to get to some Q&A here in a minute, but before we do, I just want to do a little housekeeping here. There's a couple of things, as Rick already mentioned. We're doing this is going to be a monthly live stream for VMware Cloud Foundation Live. So next month on tap, we're going to be bringing in Director of Product Marketing, Yumi Hong, who's going to be focusing on the disaster recovery. So that one's going to be called Enabling a Cyber Resilient Private Cloud. So that one's going to be live streamed on LinkedIn, on YouTube, or Twitter/X. Also, every other Wednesday from this point forward for the foreseeable future, there's going to be another webinar, a VCF webinar. So every other Wednesday, there's going to be a webinar series, which is going to be certainly a technical deep dive, and it's going to be hosted by Anders Hudson. And the first one he's got on tap is on March 20th. He's going to bring on Michael Gandy. And if you don't know Michael is amazing. He focuses on data services manager, and they're going to be talking about accelerate data-driven innovation with new data services capabilities for VMware Cloud Foundation. So that one is not going to be live streamed everywhere. You actually have to register for that one. So link right there. And maybe we can also get the link posted in the chat. So yeah, be sure to sign up for those upcoming webinars. Also, if you are an audio person, there is a podcast. There's also a video version, but I recommend the audio version because #Face4Radio. But my good friend John Nicholson and I host a technical podcast where we focus on all things in the SCDC, and that's called Virtually Speaking. It's on your podcast platform of choice, as well as Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and all that. So be sure to check that out as well. And then last but not least, if you're not aware, there's a VMware Cloud Foundation YouTube channel, link right there. This is a great channel to go for not only content like this, and this is also the place where we're parking all the live streams, but also there's great content from the VCF technical marketing team, like Heath Johnson, for example, who, again, another face for radio, but he does great content, and he recently did a technical deep dive series. He's actually in the middle of it. And really good content. So be sure to check out Heath on the VCF YouTube channel. And with that, as I segue into Heath, welcome to the live stream.
Hey guys, thanks for the fine feedback about my face and how I've got.
You got 3 faces for radio right here.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm curious. Rick and I, we've been chatting away here, and I've been enjoying the conversation. But I'm curious: has there been any themes? Has there been any key questions that maybe we can bring to light here and discuss?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a couple things that have come up on the chat here. One of them, Rick dived into a little bit, talking about the SCDC manager, right? We had somebody asking about the SCDC manager, and I wanted to provide even a little more color on that because that's a new thing to our vSphere admins, right? They're typically dealing with the vCenter, and they're like, oh, wait, now there's another appliance, right? So yes, there's actually, on a technical level, there's 2 appliances, right? 2 different separate virtual machines that manage the infrastructure. And so the vCenter server stays there, and it's the tool you know and love for managing your applications, right? Consider it the application management level for those virtual machines. The SDDC manager is more about managing the cloud infrastructure. It's a layer above, right? And so being able to, like Rick talked about, being able to deploy and manage and patch and upgrade the underlying infrastructure, I can almost see this being managed by 2 completely different sysadmins, right? One's more of a vSphere admin, and another one would be a silo where this could get managed manage is more of a cloud administrator, where you're managing that infrastructure and managing the patches and upgrades of all the underlying infrastructure, but you're not touching the actual virtual machines in the end. So yeah, definitely two. And that was kind of one of the other questions they asked for color was, is this two or one single pane of glass? And it's not a single pane of glass, right? I always hate that term. I know Rick does too. It is two different panes of glass. One's for managing the cloud infrastructure, and one is for managing your virtual machines. So, really good question there. I actually have that on my list to actually do a deep dive on what is this SDC manager, a separate appliance. So, as you mentioned, stay tuned to the YouTube channel, and that will show up on there. I'm going to do that one coming up pretty soon.
I like it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Good stuff. Good stuff. Heath, I saw another question about vSAN, and is vSAN required as part of a VCF deployment? You want to touch on that one too? Because that comes up a lot.
It does, right? And so even a little deeper on that, yes, vSAN is required to deploy initially VMware Cloud Foundation, right? We have something that we call the management domain within VMware Cloud Foundation. And in order to deploy that first initial deployment of VMware Cloud Foundation, where the SDDC manager appliance lives, where that physically gets deployed, has to get deployed on top of vSAN. And then from there, the vCenter appliances and all the other NSX manager appliances, all those get built on top of that management cluster, that management domain for VMware Cloud Foundation. Now, I've seen a lot of questions asking about ESA and OSA, right? So express storage architecture or the original storage architecture for vSAN. The management domain just recently with our 5.1 release now supports that ESA, right? For actually deploying the express storage architecture with the management domain. That's brand new. That just came out and highly anticipated by a lot of our customers. And so, yes, it is required for that management domain. Outside of that, we support a lot of additional storage options, right? We know a lot of customers out there leverage third-party storage, right? We've got partners like Pure and Dell that sell fantastic storage, and they want to continue to leverage those very expensive purchases they've got in existing Fiber Channel or NFS storage. And absolutely, we support connecting those as well. There's some technical requirements behind that, and we're going to cover those in that YouTube video as well. So stay tuned.
But doesn't it make sense? I don't know. Maybe I'm biased, but doesn't it just make sense that you're gonna, like, if you're talking about the management domain, that you want everything on the same integrated stack? Like, I get it. You know, you've got other storage that you may want to use for other things, but I don't know if I would want, even if I had other storage, I don't think I'd want to use it for the management domain. Let's just let that thing appear and be ready and
right,
all integrated.
No doubt there is major advantages to vSAN, right? Being able to actually, when you want more capacity, add another host and it grows with it. And then at the same time, as you're adding more storage with more capacity, you're actually getting more compute and RAM and all the different pieces that go with it. So it scales very easily with VMware Cloud Foundation.
Nice.
Very cool.
Any other questions? What about Salsa? Did anyone ask questions about Rick Salsa? I didn't see many questions.
No takers.
No, not on that one.
I have one, Rick. Does the chip matter? You know, like, you know, are all chips created equal?
It does. I mean, and just like all things, right? Chip is a salsa delivery vehicle, but you know, if the chip sucks, then it's going to ruin the whole experience. So yeah, actually, Josh Gillick did throw a hands up for salsa, so I saw that in the chat.
Nice. Very nice. All right, cool. Well, I think that's, you know, we're running close on time here. Obviously, this is going to be available on demand as well. And we're certainly open to more discussions, you know, both on the comments of this post, but also on YouTube, you know, on Twitter or X, wherever you want to find us. But yeah, Rick, thank you for joining. And Heath, of course, thank you so much for helping with the Q&A, man. You were definitely busy at there for a little while. I appreciate you.
Yeah, and Kyle too. Kyle's done a great job in kind of tracking it there. So Kyle, thanks for all your help there.
Absolutely. Yeah, very cool. Heath, I appreciate you. And Rick, I just want to take a minute to thank you for being my guinea pig for round one of this VMware Cloud Foundation live series. Appreciate all your input on this. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the next one. But thanks for being guest 01.
No, I appreciate it, and thanks for all your help on this. It's great.
Yeah, and for the rest of you, yeah, stay tuned. We'll see you in 30 days, where we're talking about VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery. But until then, bye for now.
All right. Thanks.